Beginning in the section there about verse 21, where Peter is talking to Jesus, it says there that Peter came up to Jesus and he asked him, "How often should I forgive my brother?" Your version may be a little different than the way I read it to you this morning, but it's pretty much the same. How often should I forgive my brothers? Up to 7 times. And Jesus responded to him, "No, Peter, not 7 times, but 70 times 7, or 77 times, some translations say." And then he goes into this story. Therefore, the kingdom of heaven is like. I want you to understand that when Jesus is talking about kingdom of heaven, it's just not reference to sometime in the future when we all get to be in God's kingdom in heaven. Because Jesus' kingdom was established here on earth because of his death, burial, and resurrection, and it becomes the church. Church, we are a part of the kingdom of heaven here on earth. And so he is talking directly to those who are his. Therefore, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle his accounts. And so he brought in all of those that owed him money, all of his servants. And as he began the settlement process, a man entered who owed him, and here again your translation may read a little bit different. Therein came a man who owed him 10,000 bags of gold. And I want you to get in your head here, what basically Jesus is saying here is a man who owes this king so much money, he will never be able to repay him. Unless he wins the lottery or something. I don't know. It's not going to happen. Okay? And so what the king decides to do is, well, we're going to sell this man and his family and all of his possessions to pay for this debt. And when the man hears, when this servant hears what the king has to say, he falls to his knees and he begins to beg the king, the master, to have a little mercy. "Give me a little time," he says, "and I will be able to repay you everything." The servant's master looks upon him with pity, and basically he cancels all of this man's debt, and he lets him go. And then here the story takes a little bit of a twist, because this servant then goes out and he looks up all the people who owe him money, and he finds one that owes him just a few hundred silver coins, just a tiny amount into the comparison of what he owed to the king. And he grabs him and he begins to choke him, and he says, "I want you to pay me back." This fellow servant fell to his knees, just like he had done before the king, and he begged him, "Be patient with me, and I will pay you back everything." But he refused. This servant refused to have mercy on his fellow servant, and he throws the man into prison until he can repay his debt. When the other servants saw what had happened, they were outraged. And they told their master everything that they had witnessed. And so the master called the servant in, and he said to him, "You wicked servant, I forgave you all of your debt. I canceled everything that you owed me. Why did you not show mercy to your fellow servant, just as I have done for you?" And in anger, he handed him over to the jailers to be tortured until he should pay back everything that he owed. This is how my Heavenly Father will treat each of you unless you forgive one another from your heart. I want to ask you a question, and I'm going to come down and we're going to share together just for a second here. I don't normally do this. Brenda, if you'll put that slide up for me. Someone wrote, and I don't know who it was that wrote this, "Unforgiveness is like drinking a poison and expecting the other person to die from it." And we're talking about in terms of forgiveness this morning. Unforgiveness is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die from it. So I want to ask you to share with me, just for a second, try to illustrate this point. Finish the sentence. Unforgiveness is like what? Okay, exactly what that says. That's a great answer. You got that one out of the way. She said, drinking a poison, expect the other person to die. Maybe that's hard for you to come up with words for right this second. When you are holding grudges against people, when you are not willing to forgive one another, how does that make you feel? Maybe you can answer that one a little easier. Anybody want to take that one? How does it make you feel that you won't forgive someone? Sprung this one on you and you weren't ready, were you? Guilty. Good answer. Somebody else?
Painful.
Pain. That's a good one too.
Tied to the past.
Tied to the past. See, that's the one I was hoping for. Go ahead, Wayne.
Oscar the Grouch.
Oscar the Grouch. Doesn't it kind of make you feel like you're in prison? I've never been in prison, so I don't really know that I can say that very fairly. But doesn't it hold you captive? Doesn't it create in you less than a sense of joy? Less than a sense of happiness? Less than a sense of peace? Unforgiveness is difficult.
I doubt it. Too many of us really wish that person would die if we're not forgiving them. But Jesus' analogies that he makes in lots of ways, that's what we might really feel in our heart.
We don't want to show much love, do we? We don't want to show them any love. Here's the deal. Jesus' parable, Jesus' story that he shares with Peter and those who were gathered there that day should remind us of a lot of great things about God. A lot of great things about his Son, even that we could share in our own lives. And of all the things that it teaches us, the greatest thing that Jesus is focused on is the most important, and that is true forgiveness. Most people hear this story, maybe they react saying, you know what, nobody really acts that way today. I mean, I don't owe anybody that much money, and I wouldn't expect them to throw me in jail and sell my family. Nobody really acts that way, do they? And I ask you, do we, in light of God's mercies and grace to us, do we not act that way sometimes? The point of the parable is not the circumstances of the servant. The point of the parable isn't surrounded totally by this idea that he owed this huge amount of money. The point of the parable is what Jesus wanted to realize. We have all been forgiven a great debt. All of us have been forgiven a great debt. And if we follow Christ, we should not refuse that mercy on other people, any other people, regardless of the circumstances or the things that they have done. What this parable so vividly points out to us is a marvelous example, but at the same time, a terrible example of our own wicked tendency to plead for forgiveness for ourselves, but deny it to other people. To plead for forgiveness for ourselves, but be incapable of even trying to offer it to others. Jesus wants us all to understand that when we can't forgive someone else, we can also not, despite any argument that we may claim against it, we cannot truly show a capacity to love. The reason I say that is this: if we can't forgive other people, we cannot truly love God, our Father, and our Savior, because Jesus has commanded us and warned us, and if you love me, then you must obey my commands. Jesus demands forgiveness. God expects and demands forgiveness. So just for a few minutes this morning, let's examine ourselves. Let's take the opportunity to find within ourselves that we're harboring some spirit of unforgiveness. I want to start this by saying this. I am not a licensed counselor. Okay? Anita Ritchie is a professional counselor, and she keeps an office right over here in this hall. And there is nothing in this life, or at least I can't think of any, that would tickle her more than to be able to help people. So if you find something today that you realize is a struggle for you, and you don't want to talk to me about it, or you don't want to talk to the others about it, I would encourage you to talk to her, right, Harris? Because I think she would love to help you with problems that you may be harboring in your life in regard to this. Not that I wouldn't, or the others would, or Jordan for that matter would. We would too. Ask yourself these questions. Have you been wronged or hurt recently? Have you been wronged or hurt in the past? Was your tendency to try and forget about it, to move on to something or someone else? Did you get into the habit of burying that painful emotion that seemed to raise its head at the wrong time? Do you find yourself staying away from some people or certain places? Are there places or things or people that cause you to feel hurt all over again? And are there behavior patterns that you find impossible to change? If you answered yes to any of these questions, chances are there are people that you need to forgive. It could be very well that you are harboring an unforgiving spirit. And I would ask all of us, because all of us have been hurt at some point in our lives. Please don't allow your pride. Please do not allow selfishness to get in your way, to get in the way of forgiveness. Please don't allow your fear of the painful emotions that might stem from having to deal with forgiving stop you. Unforgiveness usually does not happen overnight. Most of the time it's plainly obvious that we are being unforgiving. Maybe other times it's harder to recognize. So how would you know if you display an unforgiving spirit? How could you examine yourself and ask yourself, am I really being an unforgiving person? Let's talk about it for just a second. Some of these may resonate with you, others may not, but please identify the spirit of unforgiveness that you may have in your life. In almost every case, unforgiveness, in every case of it, it stems from being hurt. Maybe we're hurt by words. Maybe it's because we were overlooked. Maybe it's a result of how someone that is very close to us, someone that we love very much, treated us. Whatever the circumstances are, most often the need for forgiveness involves our being hurt. The bottom line is, because we live in such a self-centered world, we most often experience rejection of some kind. Often the hurt is initiated by someone we love or trust or respect very deeply. And we may recognize that rejection immediately. There's a chance, though, that maybe we don't recognize it immediately. Maybe we recognize it much later in life. And our pain usually stems from the feelings of abandonment, embarrassment, hatred, some kind of negative behavior or emotion that is directed towards us. But mostly it relates just to rejection. That then usually leads to our being confused. Why would they do that? We ask ourselves. And we don't immediately know how to respond. We struggle in that response. Because we're in, like somebody described it, as a state of shock. Maybe we even think that this can't possibly be happening. Maybe we say those words. We might have a physical reaction, like someone punched us in the stomach. Typically, we don't usually stay in that moment for a very long period of time, so we move on to other things. For most, because we don't like pain, emotional or otherwise, we try to avoid the thoughts. And in this stage, we might turn to addictive behaviors to try to manage the pain. Maybe for you, that's not it. Maybe you don't do it that way, but instead you avoid people, or you avoid places that we relate to our pain. We could even associate our pain with the church, or a job, or a parental figure. Maybe we even make it public. We make negative statements associated to people or places. And it's usually around that time that we start to avoid that pain. We begin to arrange our thought patterns and lives in general so as to never come into contact with anything that reminds us of that hurt. We attempt to forget the whole thing never even happened. We dig a hole and bury it as deeply as we can, or we just flat out deny everything happened. Maybe we deny that we weren't really hurt at all. Or we say things like, I got over that a long time ago. I want you to understand this is a very, very difficult area to be in. Because if we don't deal with our unforgiveness, we are then tagged with the burden of carrying around a ton of bitterness, which is usually demonstrated through our tempers or other negative behaviors. Regardless of how successful we think we may be at hiding or avoiding or burying our hurts, which is unforgiveness, it still comes to rear its ugly head, again, through patterns of speech and behavior. Short tempers, insensitivity, shyness, critical spirits, jealousy. These are all evidences of an unforgiving spirit. I want to share something with you. This is no secret. It won't matter. It will not matter how many times you rededicate yourself. It will not matter what your New Year's resolutions were. It won't matter how much scripture you have memorized in your life. It won't matter how persistent you are in your prayer life or how long your prayers to the Lord are. Until you deal with the root of your pain, you will ultimately be defeated by unforgiveness. The only way that we can make a turnaround, quick or not, is to identify, acknowledge, and then deal with this unforgiveness. Because if we don't, we will become discouraged. Church, are you listening to me? Yes. Very good. Thank you. This is critical. Because when we get to the stage of discouragement, our minds are convinced that both ourselves and those around us will never be able to change. That things will never be any better, and that others cannot truly love us, so how could we possibly love them? And this is where any perceived progress that we seem to come upon in our lives is easily shattered by the littlest of things, thus confirming our suspicion that all is hopeless. Which leads us to the stage of destroying respect. Our loyalties begin to dissolve. Our sense of duty and zeal for the Lord diminishes until we are tempted to subscribe to this ideal that there needs to be some kind of spiritual divorce. We leave the church because that's the only option. For many at this point, the powerful poison of maybe even entertaining the thoughts of escaping this life begin to creep in. That is why it is so dangerous. But here's the thing, we all know better. We know, and we sometimes are willing to profess, through God's grace and help of our church family, that we can discover the root of our pain. We can forgive. We can deal with it. can take on the command that Jesus has left for all of us. Forgive as you have been forgiven. Because without forgiving, there is no forgiveness for ourselves. Because God knows, Jesus knows, the only outcome to be desired is forgiveness. Jesus knows none of us wants to be imprisoned by embarrassing, hurtful, or inappropriate relationships or behavior. Jesus does not want that for any of us, and we don't want that for ourselves. And yet we participate in it. Forgiveness is the answer to freeing ourselves from the prison of our hurts. And I am confident that there isn't anyone, there is not one soul sitting in this room this morning that hasn't had a rift with someone. Maybe there's a rift between two or more of us in here this very day. Maybe you hurt so much you just can't bring yourself to forgive what that person said or did. But let me encourage you towards forgiveness by asking, listen carefully. If your past were their past, if your pain were their pain, you would undoubtedly think and act exactly as they did. And when we begin to understand that, we arrive at forgiveness. We arrive at compassion. We arrive at peace. Most often we feel like that whatever it is that other person did to hurt us, it was something that they knew we shouldn't be treated that way. And we would be right. But where we fail is the acknowledgement and understanding, usually by our own arrogance. Why, in a fallen world, would we assume that others should have known better? Based on our response to our own hurts, based on how we react to people who hurt us, did we behave any differently? We may never be able to forget our hurts. We may never be able to forget our hurts or the abuse that we've endured. And the cause of our hurts may never be justified. They may never be understood. But that's okay. That is okay. It doesn't have to be forgotten. It doesn't have to be understood. But forgiveness must occur. Forgiveness would say, I don't want to be hurt by you. I don't want to be angry at you forever. I love you enough to forgive you of this and not hold it against you anymore. Understand that you may hurt me again. Church, that is something that we must do. And it must be done verbally. Even if the time that has passed since our hurt has been years. Nothing is more liberating. Nothing is more righteous or God-like than participating in the act of forgiveness. And yet nothing is more difficult for any of us to do. Forgive from the heart, Jesus said. It is a costly advent. It cost God His only Son. And let me assure you, nothing is more wonderful than forgiveness freely given and freely received. It is God's design. It is God's design that forgiveness heals and restores peace and joy and unity is the fruit of the Spirit revealing itself in our lives. And it is our great fortune to take part in it. Here's the thing, and this is also very difficult. You cannot buy forgiveness with a gift. You cannot buy forgiveness with money. It will cost you your heart to give it away. Unfortunately, that is a risk that the world will not take. I don't know if you need to forgive someone this morning or not. My guess is probably in general, people this size, they're on more than one. Myself included. We cannot have forgiveness if we don't forgive church. It's something that we must do. We have all been called, we've all been called to take up the cross and follow after Jesus. So I would invite you this morning. Take courage, pick up that cross. If you need to forgive someone, start walking. Get it done. You need to respond to the message this morning that's been left at this time for you to be able to